If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Hear ye. Come on. You are listening to the Sixth Sense Report with Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels.
You know, only 166 episodes deep, and you got to change the intro up a little bit. No big deal. I like it. Yeah.
Gotta keep them guessing. Man.
Yeah, man. You know, it's so weird. We're talking about this one, talking about euthanasia, and it was all we're finally at the point where I'm like, I'm pretty sure we did an episode on this, and we never did. Or, I mean, if we did, I'm totally drawing a blank on that one. But the reason I'm pretty sure we didn't is because I remember chatting with Dina Warren, who we had on for the BC Christian legal school, let's call it. I'm drawing a blank on the name of the school, but I was talking to her about this because it's right up her alley, and that was like 3.5 years ago, but we never ended up touching. Well, it got passed in early 2020 or even 2019, that it all sort of was happening. I think the laws finally came through in early 2020, but in 2019, 2018, like I got an article from Dina Warren. The 4Cs one is dated Jan 2020, and the sorry about that. She's got a policy options. It's like a very legal-ish article. 2017 talking about this. Mm-hmm. So it's been a long time coming, and then now we're having a conversation about it because there's some interesting headlines that make this an interesting topic.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a long time coming, and a timely episode. For listeners who don't know, my grandma passed away about 2 weeks ago. She was 92. She had cancer, and like the final stages of her passing was pretty rough, where she was in hospital in a coma for a bit, and then she came up out of it, and they sent her home to die. And so I was just like, man, then I really started thinking through. I'm like, okay, so how does this euthanasia thing work? Just thinking through the arguments and actually seeing a loved one suffering, and you're kind of like, okay, how does this play out? So for the listeners, we're going to talk about the uniqueness of the Canada's euthanasia policy, and we're going to look at is libertarianism to blame for Canada's progressive euthanasia policy, and then the last point, most Canadians think this is a service of compassion, and there's these arguments, and these arguments are being drawn from a Forbes article on new euthanasia laws carry upsetting Nazi era echoes. Canada's new euthanasia law carry upsetting Nazi era echoes.
Yeah, it's a pretty heavy headline. There's also a CBC article that was sort of a catalyst for me. Touches a little bit more on the economic side of it. So the headline is, there's a CBC article, medically assisted deaths could save millions in healthcare spending report. So this totally piqued my interest in this topic.
And actually, this is something I've definitely saw. I saw those articles kind of popping up as well.
So for you, Darnell, what really intrigued you about this issue?
Well, of course, a timely, but also just thinking through. Okay, well, the article that I was seeing was explaining that Canada was more extreme in our euthanasia policy, and I'm like, well, like how much more extreme can it be? And so the way it's extreme, or what makes it unique, is that Bill C7. So the idea is that death had to be reasonably foreseeable in order to be, and the word is MAID, MAID, and that's an acronym for medical assistance in dying. And so the idea is for people traditionally had to have a terminal illness, and basically death was coming. You can see it coming.
Inevitable.
Yeah, it's inevitable. So you can speed it up, right? But now Canada said, okay, well, you don't necessarily need a terminal illness. You could have a chronic illness, and depending on the perspective of the patient, you can get a MAID, medical assistance in dying. Right.
Yeah,
And so you don't need it. You don't necessarily need a doctor to prescribe that. You could also have like a nurse, and there's like a 90-day window, 90-day waiting period. So at the end of the 90 days, if you still want to do it, then it's a go.
Yeah, and I mean, without even let's say qualifying this statement in the sense of like, I don't know if this is necessarily true, but like, if I look at something like depression, would that qualify? Is that chronic?
Well, no. So right now, the way how the policy is set up, it doesn't include mental health right now, for now. But if not this, why not that?
Yes. And this is where, where I was trying to go with it was, let's just say it's, pain, even, right? Chronic pain. And so the thought that comes to my mind is, how many people go through seasons of life? And then mental health is an easier one to go down use that example, because, it's, I don't want to say easy, but there's people who have, can look back and go, yeah, 20 years ago, I really struggled.
Yep.
Right. And I'm sure with pain, I'm sure there's people with similar testimonies. Right. And so is 90 days going to be the way that you get past, that chronic scenario? No, but maybe 5 years is. And so I think when you've like, if we go back to the point about when death was inevitable, it's a totally different conversation. And I think you can really make a strong steelman case for the idea of being able to sort of like set the time when you like, oh, I know I'm going to die in the next 40 days. The potential for someone to say, I want to pick day 34. Like, again, I'm trying to steelman the case to go like compassion based, this essentially allowing them or to choose when they know it's coming. To me, I think there can be a case made that that's compassionate. Now, I think you could still make the case to say, no, we shouldn't do it, but that's a different conversation. I'm just trying to stay, I think there could be a reasonable argument for the idea for the inevitable person or person who's inevitable to die in the short time period ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one nuance in definition. So the idea euthanasia is, and according to the the medical definition in Canada, is euthanasia is lethal injection. So is what the doctor does to the person, and then assisted suicide, the doctor gives you the drugs and then you administer yourself.
I see. Yeah. And I mean, from a liability perspective, you can sort of see the difference in the two, right? I'm helping you do something versus I'm the one executing.
Yeah, right. Just to be clear, so what euthanasia is as opposed to assisted suicide or a MAID, medical assistance in dying, MAID. Okay, so in the article, Joel, it talks about it says that Canada is to blame, or the libertarian perspective is to blame for Canada's progressive euthanasia policy. And you being the libertarian king, expert, connoisseur.
Yeah.
Is that a straw man?
I think if we go back to our episode, the Type Beast on why liberalism failed, I think what you were talking about, that I call it hyper liberalism, or
Or
that,
illiberalism?
well, the hyper autonomy, right? That early liberalism, I
Okay.
think, aligns a little bit better with the argument than libertarianism as a whole, because I can see a level. I wouldn't call it a straw man, but I would say it's probably not a very nuanced position. It's not well articulated, because the libertarian's positions, or a libertarian position in general, is usually more individual based, self autonomy. There is some alignment there, but that's where the, you know, absolute nature of autonomy that we were talking about with, the roots of liberalism, I think aligns a little bit better with what they're saying.
Mhm.
What I would say though is that libertarians would likely be in line with this concept a little bit more. So
With being okay with euthanasia,
no, with the
with
idea,
assisted suicide.
see, I would say the idea that if somebody wants to kill themselves, or if
Mhm.
somebody wants to end their life,
Mhm.
there's a level that, from a libertarian perspective, what right do I have to stop them? Now, that's I would say debated, because lots of people would say I could commit violence to prevent you from jumping off a bridge, and it may not be, let's call it, a violation of the non-aggression principle. I only say that as like
Oh,
there's
and hold on,
debate
for
there.
those who don't know, what is the non-aggression principle?
I'm gonna, let's call it layman term it. Basically, violence is only justified as an action when inevitable harm is being prevented. So the idea is that I must operate with a non-aggression with everybody, otherwise immoral or illegal. We can get down that bait. But the non-aggression principle being that I must not aggress someone else, otherwise that's a violation of their rights. And the
Mhm.
only exception, and exception is not really the right word, but would be in self-defense, or when inevitable harm is coming,
Mhm.
I can prevent that with violence.
So can we say like that? Don't harm me. Don't harm my property.
Yeah,
Non-aggression.
yeah, exactly. And that's where,
And
I've been using the term voluntarism. I think I'm stealing this word from Stephen Kinsella. Consensualism is probably the term I would adopt more so now.
so then,
Being
okay. So then, the term consensual. Are we saying like it's consensual to say that I'm going to harm my property? Or they wouldn't say that. They wouldn't
well,
say harm.
no,
No, hold on. The person wouldn't say they would harm my property.
oh
They just say
yes,
right. They wouldn't say I'm going to harm my property. They're saying, well, I'm going to cure my property. Can
hmm
you? We're going to be in a consensual relationship. Can you assist me in healing my illness by
ending my
ending my
life.
life? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is where the libertarians would be more likely to sort of go, okay, um, I want to be consistent with my principles, but where's the line? And so here's the biggest problem with this:
Mhm.
who's actually funding this decision,
Sorry, funding. Oh, the government. To fund. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, to
And
fund it. Yeah.
so it's not an individual purchasing the products to do this. The like there's in other actors involved in this scenario, and so
Mhm.
maybe the argument that someone should have greater access to kill themselves would be a libertarian argument. But the idea that government funded medically assisted suicide, that's, not a libertarian sort of place. And, it's sort of very much it's very much outside of what libertarian sort of principles would stand for.
Yeah, but it's still liberalism, right? And I
Yes.
recommend the listeners go back to why liberalism failed, the typebeast episode where we talked about why liberalism failed, and in the two strands of liberalism. So we could say this probably like left leaning liberalism, where they're saying, okay, we're gonna ask the government to give us full autonomy, full freedom to do as we please, leveraging the government to do that. And you're saying that, you know, the traditional libertarian is saying, well, you want lesser government involvement.
Yeah. So the libertarian argument would be like the government shouldn't make it illegal.
Make what illegal?
So, these drugs are illegal in the country because they're used for suicide. So a libertarian argument would be like against making those drugs illegal.
Mhm.
Right. And so my point is like the government getting in the way of someone acting freely for themselves is where the libertarians would sort of have some alignment.
But the government's not getting in the way.
No, but this
It's
is my
actually
point.
empowering.
Yes. And this is where I was trying to say that like there's some alignment with the principles behind the arguments, but the execution is so far from a libertarian concept. Right? Especially take my CBC article as a prime example. Medically assisted deaths could save millions in healthcare spending.
Right, because people would opt out on their life, right? As
Right?
opposed to use up the
well, and if you take
system.
someone with chronic pain as a great example, right? Like how much drugs are they how many years potentially are they on expensive drugs? Or you know, let's say cancer treatments. Or whatever the high dollar drug is that someone's like, you know what, I don't want to go through that. I don't want to go try, I don't want to try. Let's just finish now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, but this is where it's such a deeper issue than any sort of libertarian principle because there's so many players involved, especially in Canada, right? This is all government funded. This is all this is a CBC article talking about how our healthcare system, which is an absolute dumpster fire, could be better off because we'd stop spending money and we could reallocate it to other places. Like really, that's where we're going with this article.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it's,
well, I guess part of it too is, then you have, if government is not going to fund it, then maybe people just terminate their life.
So here's the other side of this with the libertarian piece, and we can move on to the next point, but there's no accountability either. Right? So this is the one thing, if we go back to liberalism versus liberty principles, the real big difference we were making was that liberty has a lot more response, like the libertarian side of things, classical liberal had a lot more to do with responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so the responsibility, like think of it from a business, right? If I was in a more free market scenario, if there's a business that is willing to give euthanasia drugs to people that they shouldn't have, that reputation is going to be tarnished. But when the government's doing it, what reputation? They don't have to worry about customers. And right. So my point is that like there's so much more depth to this if it was in a free market, voluntary, true, consensual and self-funded, or obviously not to say that people couldn't fundraise if it was out of a compassion scenario, right? Mm-hmm. through a charity or a nonprofit scenario, because it's purely out of compassion. And I would assume lots of people would be willing to potentially help people, avoid excessive pain, let's say, in trying to live until they die. Right. So, but that's where, again, this concept of the government's the one pushing this program. The government is the one funding the program. Any sort of libertarianism is sort of lost in the execution.
Yeah. Well, and why liberalism failed. Patrick, what is it? Patrick
Deenan.
Yeah. He would argue that it isn't the government that's the problem. It's the people. The people that are saying, okay, well, we're going to champion liberalism and complete autonomy, complete freedom. And so they're leveraging the government to give them to fund that complete freedom. So he would blame the people.
Well, and so if I would call it a corollary of his point is that the fact the people give the government the power or want the government to have this power or utilize the government executing that power is part of the problem. Because if we took the power away from the government, the fact that people want it would result in going, well, consensually make it happen, right? The problem is, as if I was oversimplifying this Patrick Deenan's position, is that it's that we want to create autonomy through government, right? Like the goal is that liberalism is through government, as opposed to the libertarian position is more give me liberty by getting government out of the way. But we can move on to our last point here, and the idea that most Canadians think this is a compassion thing. And for me, I think the simple statement is like, it's just politics, man. It's all politics. Like the reason why people think it's compassion is because this CBC article is a report on, could save millions, right? That sounds like a great thing. Oh, that's an added benefit of this compassion program, right? Like there's no real debate in our media about, like, have you ever seen anyone really debate this as like good or bad, even in the last 2 years? Like,
No.
Obviously there are people like Dina Warren who are writing articles, trying to raise awareness, but mainstream media is dead silent on terms of the nuance to this problem, or and I would say, obviously this isn't in America right now, and this is a Canadian specific issue, but I wouldn't be surprised, especially if you start seeing things like this being, further touted by our, pundits. You're going to have a similar, probably California is going to adopt something similar, or the very left leaning parts of America. And I only say that because the right leaning has a religious, undertone to it that would prevent potentially it. But I would think your conservatives that are, not really religious, they would potentially value the lower government spending potential of Medicare, Medicaid programs.
Yep.
Right. So there's lots of potential arguments that could be made to support this type of a program when you're not having nuance, when you're not having debate, when you're actually not willing to look at both sides of, oh, wait a second, what are we doing here?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think for people, the moral compass, right? Or the Overton window, right? At one point, the world is saying, or the culture is saying, okay, this is okay, right? And then it moves over, and then it slightly moves over. So at one point, we're like, oh, euthanasia is a terrible idea, and all of a sudden, it's actually the most loving thing to do, to help somebody in their suffering. And I think this comes back to simple, or not simple, but the theory, theonomy, not the problem of evil. I think it's I forgot theonomy. But anyways, the problem of evil, and looking at how, okay, well, how do we deal with evil? How do we deal with suffering? What's the most compassionate way to come for people? And I think, definitely not think, I know, the culture's lost, and they don't really have a moral compass besides what's trending.
Yeah. No, I think, and a lot of it's relativism, right? Like, and I think that's where your point about trending makes a lot of sense. That relativism is that, like, well, what do other people think? What does my culture think? What is, there's no objective standard for morality.
Right. And there's no standard for what constitutes for euthanasia or assisted suicide. Right. So right now, like you said, we've just opened the window, just open the door to say, okay, so you don't have to be terminally ill, right? You just have to have a chronic illness, and it's up to you to be able to define how serious it is and how bearable it is, and for you to go. And that's a total subjectivity, that the person says, okay, well, I'm going to take matters into my own hands. And like you kind of said, you brought up mental health. You brought up mental health, but
It's the
that's
next
not there yet.
trajectory.
It's yeah. and even like age wise, like how much younger can we go in
Mm.
regards to a teen suffering or whatever the case may be, or the,
Yep.
so yeah, it's kind of scary. And I just think people are trying their best. I think everybody's trying their best to be helpful and to be loving. But I don't think the culture knows what love is. Uh, yeah.
No,
So
that I mean that's I was gonna say that's dead on, man. Because
uh
part of the problem is sometimes telling someone what they want is the worst possible thing, and that they're an idiot is actually the loving thing to do. Obviously, you don't call them an idiot if you're trying to be loving, but the reality is, if someone is being an idiot, the loving thing to do is actually point that out and put it, dead in their face. Put the mirror up in front of them to demonstrate, like, no, you're wrong here. This isn't right. You shouldn't do this. But so much of our loving statement is, oh, affirm their truth,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Like, you just, whatever someone's perspective or experience is, we're going to affirm that, right?
mhm,
That's sort of the, culture today for the way to think through these things.
mhm, mhm. Okay, so what's your 2 cents?
Um, my 2 cents is that I'm not surprised that a socialist healthcare system is actually the one leading the way on something like this, or I should say, one of the leaders on something like this. But it's also, and some people might not totally see this connection, so I'll try to draw it out. I see this as an example of the the application of a concept, which was many times when there's a debate about socialized healthcare, there's always this argument towards the concept of death panels. And death panels are the idea that at some point, a socialist system requires a panel of people to decide who gets what and who doesn't. Now, obviously, if you make a counter argument in the free market meritocracy scenario, a lot of that ends up being based on money. But that's where compassion comes into play. And now it's based, if it's a compassion scenario, it's based on who's going, how do we utilize our resources as best as possible, right? To help those who can't afford to do it. So coming back to the death panel point, the idea was with that argument is that at some point there's not enough resources for the medical system to help everybody. So they have to pick some people to live and some people to die.
Mhm,
Now, the term death panels is way too weighted and heated because it sounds like there's literally people picking who's going to die. But in reality, that's why I look at something like this. That, especially with the CBC headline, oh, we're going to save a whole bunch of money on healthcare. Again, in a socialized system like Canada's, for the American listeners, for Canadians, I would argue, who are largely unaware of how bad our system is, like, our system is literally on the brink of collapse, and especially in Ontario. Like, it is, if we don't get some sort of like private public duality, the Ontario system is probably going to buckle in a way that we don't even want to test. Like, I've just heard with regards to, the mandates, the lack of staffing, overworked and burnt out, healthcare professionals. I think we're really finding ourselves at the brink. And I'd be surprised if 5 years from now our system doesn't look fundamentally different. And so, yeah, again, going back to my death panels point, it's just that we are running out of resources. I would argue Canada's death panels largely shows up through wait times, right? Someone's got to wait 4 months for their diagnosis, then they got to wait
mhm,
4 months for the surgery, then they got to, oh, you just end up dying before you got appropriate treatment. Like,
mhm,
I would argue that's an example of death panels, because the term death panel was a generic term to reference the idea that you don't have enough resources, and there's just, and the manner in which, in Canada, the manner in which you get, the resources is you were just happen to be front of the line, and you happen to have enough time in your window of diagnosis or sickness that you could still survive.
mhm.
What about you, Darnell? What's your 2 cents on this? Um,
I think that, well, just reflecting on the whole situation with my grandma, and um, like what's the biblical way to approach this. And I thought about um, a quote from Pastor Eric Mason, and he said, "It's either you're coming out of suffering, or you're going into suffering."
Mm.
So like wrestling with sin in the form of suffering and death takes great maturity and courage to actually contemplate, okay, how am I going to handle that? How am I going to reason that through? And so to the Christian, suffering is not meaningless, but to the unbeliever, suffering is meaningless. And it's as simple as that. So in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16 to 18, it says, though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. And so what this passage is doing is it's comparing light, right, with weight of glory. It's contrasting momentary affliction with eternity. And this is what's giving our suffering meaning, that we have hope in the afterlife. Hope in the afterlife. And so all we can do to help those who are suffering with terminal or chronic illness is, of course, share testimonies of those who suffered well for Christ. Mm-hmm. And then, God forbid, when it's our time to suffer, that we would suffer in a way that is a good witness to the work of Christ that is being done in us, and showing that our suffering is not meaningless. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
No, that's good, man. That's good.
For the listeners, what's your 2 cents on this issue? Let us know. Contact us. Let us know what you think. We'll definitely come back to this episode for sure, and get some other takes on it, because there's a lot to dig up in this.
Yeah, I mean, if you're willing and you want to share a testimony of good or bad regarding this, like we're willing to hear, or check out the Speak Pipe. If you saw the lower link there, I'll make sure it's on our link tree for if you want to record an audio. Speakpipe.com/your2cents, and let us know, because I think as much as we're sort of talking about this objectively or not emotionally, there may be people with testimony that sort of speaks to it in a different way that maybe adds a little nuance to this conversation for the next time we touch on it. So definitely could use some listener 2 cents if you got some thoughts on this issue.
6 cents makes change.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?
Madden and Mitchell Media.